So in this video, we are going to be looking at an introduction to Plato. Plato was a disciple of Socrates. His style was dialectical. Let me explain what that means. Socrates, Plato's master, was an exemplary philosopher. He would not just tell people what the right thing to do was, or what was the right path, or what was a good life. He would indulge people in a conversation, asking them questions and steering them towards the answer. This way, the people could themselves discover the truth. This method of conversation-based exploring of bigger questions is known as the dialectical method. I repeat, Socrates would involve people in a dialectical conversation. So he would ask people questions and he would help them discover the truth for themselves. He wouldn't say what the answer is, but he would help people find answers. This conversation-based method of exploring the bigger questions is known as dialectical method. Aristotle was Plato's disciple. Plato and Aristotle are generally studied together. So we have seen that Plato was Socrates' disciple and Aristotle was Plato's disciple. Aristotle and Plato are studied together generally, and Plato's ideas are generally the teachings of Socrates as well. Plato is considered the founder of philosophical idealism in Western political thought. Plato had many admirers and many critics. Let us look at Plato's admirers first. Richard Louis Nettleship, Ernest Barker, John Wilde, Ronald L. Levinson. Plato also had many critics. We have Popper, W. Fite, A.D. Winspear. Of these, Popper is the most important critic of Plato. So let's look at Plato's methodology in this video. Plato was very wide in his approach. He didn't confine himself to a very narrow framework as the political theorists and scientists of the 18th to 20th centuries would. Plato would go on to use the deductive method, the dialectical method, the analytical method, the teleological method, analogy, historical method, etc. So we will study all of these methods in very brief. So we'll first look at the deductive method. In the deductive method, the philosopher has preconceived conclusions and thoughts. He goes on to then reason and prove his point. I repeat, please listen carefully. In the deductive method, the philosopher has preconceived conclusions and thoughts. He goes on to then reason and prove his point. Plato's Republic is a prime example for his deductive method. Plato also attempted to find the characteristic features of the state in his own imagination and not in the existing conditions prevailing in the city-state of the ancient Greek society. So Plato attempted to find the characteristic features of the state in his own imagination, that is, he was interested in an idealist state. He did not search for a perfect state within the existing conditions that were prevailing in the city-state of the ancient Greek society. Plato was an idealist. He always went for the normative. He sought to reorient the state and society according to his understanding of justice. This is the reason Plato's thoughts are considered radical by many of his critics. I repeat, Plato always went for the normative. He is an idealist. He sought to reorient the state and society according to his understanding of justice. This is the reason Plato's thoughts are considered radical by many of his critics. The second one that we will look at is the dialectical methodology. In the beginning of the video itself, we saw what the dialectical method involves. The simplest definition of dialectics is evolution of logic. The Socratic method of dialectics involves a debate between two people who are trying to find the truth. The dialectical methodology involves a reasoned argument between two or more people. Socrates would involve the citizens in a spirited argument so that through reasoned arguments, the citizens could discover the truth for themselves. This is Plato's preferred method of teaching politics to his followers. So this is the dialectical method. So the simplest definition of dialectics is evolution of logic. The Socratic method of dialectics involves a debate between two people who are trying to find the truth, two or more people. The dialectical methodology involves a reasoned argument between two or more people. And this is Plato's preferred method for teaching politics to his followers. The third one we'll look at is the analytical method. Plato divided a complex problem into its constituent parts. He analyzed each of them, understood the solution, and collated the results thereafter. This is apparent in his explanation of the body politic. Plato, while explaining the structure of the society, compares it with the structure of the human. Plato gives an analogy of the same in body politic. Please note the use of analogy is quite prominent in Plato's work, and it is also an important methodology. Some methods are combinations of two methods, or they can look like hybrids. Nothing can exist in isolation here. Even though now we are discussing about the analytical method also uses a little bit of analogy, although analogy is itself a methodology. So Plato gives an analogy of the body politic. Please note that the use of analogy is quite prominent in Plato's work, and it is an important methodology. Human nature consists of appetite, spirit, and reason. He found all these elements in the body politic as well. Appetite is the producing class, spirit in the soldiers, reason in the ruling class. Thus stating that the constituents of the ideal state are producers who will provide the material base, soldiers who will provide the military base, rulers who will provide the rational base. Proper provision, proper protection, and proper leadership. This is what Plato was aiming for in his ideal state. The fourth method that we'll look at is the teleological method. Teleos by itself means ends, purposes, or goal. So teleology is the study of ends. In this method, all processes, phenomenon is studied with the ends in mind. The results are given great importance in the teleological method. In fact, Aristotle is known for the use of teleological method. Plato also uses it minimally, but Aristotle is more known for using the teleological method. So teleology is the study of ends. In this method, all processes, phenomenon is studied with the ends in mind. Examples of other philosophies that have an ends-based or teleological approach are utilitarianism and consequentialism. So we know Bentham used utilitarianism a lot. So even that is an ends-based approach. We also have consequentialism and consequentialist theories which also focus on the end results. So they all come under the teleological approach. Plato's theory of forms is based on his teleological approach. What appears is the shadow of what it can be. This is what Plato's theory of forms says, and it is a teleological approach. We will be studying Plato's theory of forms in great detail as we go ahead in the course. So Plato's theory of forms is based on the teleological approach. Now we'll look at analogy as a methodology of study of politics by Plato. So we have already seen how Plato uses analogy as a method while discussing the body politic. He uses the following analogies as well. He says human, cattle, copper, bronze to denote the producers of the state. He says soldiers are watchdogs or silver. He calls the rulers of the state as shepherd or gold. So these are all different kinds of analogies that he gives. The sixth method that we look at is the historical method. In Statesmen and Laws, Plato traces evolution. In this method, Plato compiles his philosophy based on the evolution of law and morality in the society. So this is the historical method. The historical method involves the study of philosophy based on evolution of law and morality in the society. That is, you study a history of law and morality in that particular society and you base your philosophy on that. So in Statesmen and Laws, Plato traces evolution. There he uses the historical method. So these are the 6 broad methods that Plato uses in his study of politics. We'll look at more of Plato in the next video. Thank you.